Hey everybody, thank you for joining me for another live chat, little Q&A, plus going to help you troubleshoot some of those common machine quilting ruler frustrations. I've been having so much fun planning out what I was going to talk about and kind of making my notes and reading the questions, and I think it's pretty obvious that some of us have a lot of similar problems, and I'm hoping that I have some really good advice that's going to help solve some of those. Now, I will tell you, unfortunately, the answer to some of those problems will be practice, but don't hate me. I'm going to give you some tips as well. So during this live chat, I'm going to kind of go through some common problems and then give you some suggestions, but just know that, every situation's a little different, but we'll see how it works out. And then I'm going to answer some questions. I've been writing down the questions that have come through on Facebook, that have come through on the YouTube chat, so plenty of questions. Thank you so much for doing that. It makes it a lot easier to answer questions when there's questions to answer. So one thing I want to talk about is, when people ask or think about machine quilting with rulers, it seems to add another component to quilting, and it can be a little overwhelming to some quilters. I'm here to assure you that it doesn't have to be that way. One question that popped up that I don't have it right here, but one question that came up said, should I learn how to free motion quilt first or quilt with rulers first? And the answer is yes, either one. If you like the idea of using rulers, then jump into that. If you like the idea of just letting it go and figuring that out first, you can do that as well. There's no set routine. There's no set way in which you have to learn anything in quilting. So definitely kind of put that out of your head and just relax, and hopefully you'll have a great time with it. Okay, so let's start first with our common frustrations. Number one, skipped stitches. So this happens a lot whenever I'm teaching a class and somebody's brought their sewing machine. It's great at home, right? And then you get out in public and the machine doesn't want to work. Usually what it is, it's usually the ruler foot. If your machine was working just completely fine and then you put your ruler foot on and it's skipping stitches, it probably means your ruler foot is a little too high. So what the ruler foot's doing, or any free motion foot, it's compressing the layers of that sandwich so that it can make a stitch. But if it's too high, it's not compressing it enough and you're not getting that stitch. And sometimes you'll notice it happens in one direction and not the other. I'm not sure about this. I mean, I am the expert in my opinion, so I'll say it that is the case, but I think it has to do with, the shape of the needle. So if you're pushing towards the needle or away from the needle, that's going to affect the fabric a little bit different. So if you have a foot, I have some pictures here. If you have an adjustable ruler foot for your machine, this is definitely what you're going to want to work with. So this is a couple of different options here. The one on the left has a screw and it adjusts, up and down that way. And the one on the right is the one like I use. It has a little knob that I can turn to raise and lower it. So usually in a class, if somebody's having a hard time, I'll come over and start messing with their foot, with their permission, of course, because I definitely don't want to, break anything. The trick is you want to get the foot high enough so that it's not compressing the sandwich too much, because if it's compressing the sandwich, you can't really quilt, right? But if it's too high, you'll start skipping stitches. So usually what I do is I will raise it until it starts skipping stitches and then bring it back down. Because I do want it as high as I can possibly get it for those bulky seams, for the ease of moving the quilt through the sandwich. So easy there. Now, in this situation, we're skipping stitches because we have changed our foot. If you're doing regular free motion quilting and you're still getting skip stitches, that's going to be a different problem altogether. This particular situation means, you just switch the foot and you're getting those skip stitches. What if you don't have an adjustable height foot? Well, I don't know. Some machines, you'll have to check with your sewing machine manufacturer. Some sewing machines do have like adjustable presser foot height. Everything is completely different, so I can only speak to what I know. So Mary Bryant said, I hope you guys can see me. I'm reading the comments off the side, and you all should know I'm really easily distracted, but that's okay. I hope everybody can see me. If you can't, leave some comments and let me know. So anyway, if you can't adjust the foot, maybe you can adjust the setting on your machine, and definitely check your manufacturer, sewing machine manufacturer, for information about that. But that is usually the case. If it's not the ruler foot height, like if it's still doing it even when it's low, then I'm going to think it's something like a needle bent, or maybe sometimes When you're quilting, you feel more comfortable going in one particular direction as opposed to another. And so you might move a little bit more jerkily or not as smooth. So hopefully that helps with that. All right, this is another common thing. So as I was kind of working through the class idea or what I was going to talk about, I kind of mentally walked myself through a class that I've done a lot for guilds and such. So they get their foot on, they're great, they're ready to go, they start quilting, and what happens? They veer off of the ruler. So that's the thing that kind of is a struggle about rulers. I don't want to say a struggle. It's just one more thing you really have to think about. The point of contact, you really have to have those two right next to each other. They need to kind of be one together. They really need to be up next to each other. Now, this is a little different depending on whether you're using a sewing machine or a long arm. On a sewing machine, I'm almost nudging the ruler into the foot. And I'm always hesitant to say this in a class, so I'm really hesitant to say it when I can't see your face, but I want to nudge it into the foot, but not so much that I'm, pushing it into the foot. It's a hard thing to explain. It's kind of like trying to talk to somebody about how to, shift gears on a manual car. You're just going to kind of keep that nudged into there, keep that point of contact, and then move on. Well, what happens is when we're working with a ruler that has a lot of different shapes, like a curve or a wave, that point of contact is going to change. And I should back up real quick. If you're working on a long arm, instead of nudging the ruler into the foot, you're nudging the machine into the ruler. So your ruler is staying in place and you're moving the machine. Again, this is something that comes with practice. And that's one of the things when I'm teaching quilters or talking about it, I'm like, I'm sorry that you paid to take a class and I'm telling you to practice. But it's just getting comfortable and knowing where you're working with that. But I do have a couple little pictures to show you. So I took some screenshots of the tutorials that will be coming out, and I'm working with Shelly right here. And you notice Shelly is a really sharp curve. It's a circle. And the more extreme the change of direction, the more, the quicker you're going to have to change that point of contact. So when I'm on the left side of Shelly, and here I'm on my long arm, the point of contact is on the right side of the foot. But as I go around to the top and then onto the side, that point of contact is going to change. So that's why wavy rulers and curvy rulers are usually the second thing I like to talk about, because in straight edge rulers, you don't have to worry about that point of contact as much. It doesn't change once you get started. But if you feel like you're struggling keeping it next to each other, keeping it along that ruler, two things: the point of contact and nudging it into the foot or nudging the machine into the ruler. But again, I want to reiterate, you don't want to push on it so hard that you're moving the machine, or you just want to nudge it into each other. Just a little nudge together. So that's usually will help if you're having trouble with that. And also just knowing that you'll get better with practice as far as that goes. Okay, how about this one? The ruler won't stay in place. You know where to go, you know what to do and where the contact needs to be, but then that ruler slips. Okay, so this is also very common. Usually if you're having trouble with the ruler slipping, it could be a couple different things. First, most importantly, when you're quilting along a ruler, you want to keep the needle or the foot of your machine in between your fingertips. So in this picture, I'm quilting on my sewing machine. My hand is on slim and the foot is always in between my fingertips. What I don't want is to have my hand way back here and then have my foot up here. I don't have as much control. It's really the same when we're learning how to free motion quilt. I put my hands on either side of the ruler or either side of the foot. That gives me the most control. It's exactly the same when you're working with rulers. So reposition your hands often and make sure you're always quilting within your fingertips. You're going to hear that a lot throughout this challenge. You're going to see it a lot in the videos and the live chats, but it's so important because at the very least, you won't get smooth lines because your ruler will be wiggling. And at the very worst, that ruler could come up, slide over and hit your needle. And I have a couple of rulers laying around that I did that intentionally so that you could have a good example of it. Now, you can always tell when I think I can make it, it's fine. And that's usually when I hit the ruler. So if you're having trouble with the ruler staying in place, another thing is you could get grip for the back of your rulers. So grip is there's a lot of different tricks, and I'm sure people will comment. You can put spray basting on the back. You can get adhesive grip, which I like, but it's very, very grippy. So make sure you want it to stay in place. Or some rulers do come with that grip on the back. And the machine quilting rulers that I've done with Creative Grids, they do have grip on the back. So that's going to help it stay in place. Last thing I'm going to say about this, about the ruler staying in place, is if you're working on your sewing machine, posture is very important. I want to be at my sewing machine where I'm pushing down. I don't want to be working up here. I want to use gravity on my side to help kind of push down. What can happen is if we're not high up enough, or we're not close enough, or we're not comfortable enough, we might be pushing kind of out instead of down. And on a sewing machine, we're treating that ruler like a handle. We're pushing it down and we're moving along the foot. So be sure you're being intentional about how you're placing it. Sometimes, and this is totally normal, we're really excited, we're ready to go, and we're just kind of pushing in the direction we're heading. We're pushing down and then over. So hopefully that will help. And on a long arm, a ruler base will be very important for keeping you safe, of course, and also for keeping that ruler in position. But like everything else, it comes with practice. If it feels weird at first, that means you're very normal. Just keep going and soon you'll be whipping it around like a ninja star. So definitely great hand position, definitely, moving in the way, and hopefully the ruler will stay in place for you. All right, and so here's another example, just moving horizontally. So even if I'm holding a ruler, no matter how I hold it, I still want to quilt in my fingertips. Now, that's the reason that slim is this long. It's about the width of my hand. I kind of did that, so that you wouldn't quilt past your fingertips, and just makes it a better situation. Now, I will say I do like a long straight edge ruler for sure. That's great for letting you see where you're going. But no matter how long the ruler is or how big, I'm still only quilting in between my fingertips. So once you can kind of wrap your mind around that, you'll realize it kind of makes everything easier. And I know some of you on here have quilted with rulers for a while, and hopefully you can back me up on that one. Okay, next one, inconsistent stitch size. Now I don't have any fun pictures for this because I was thinking, what can I show? Okay, so you're quilting along the ruler, it's staying in place, you go and you stop, and then you start up again. What happens? Oh, you get those little stitches, right? Because you're kind of ramping up and ramping down. Let me start off by saying that this is a very, very, very common question asked in classes. It's really the only reason I included it in here. I don't care about stitch length. I don't care if I have a couple little stitches close to each other, because I know when I step back, it's all going to blend together. But let's talk about it, right? How do we prevent that from happening? Well, if you have a stitch regulator, you don't usually have trouble with this. But if you are just using your manual, no stitch regulator, the problem is as you slow your hands, your machine needs to slow too. So I think sometimes as we're coming into the end of the ruler, our foot is staying the same, but our hands are slowing down because we're anticipating the end of that. And kind of the reverse, when we reposition and take off, we're pushing the pedal down and then moving our hands. And it needs to be more even with each other. Now, some machines do have, like my machine has the ability, will start slower and kind of ramp up. Some people like that. Other people just like to kind of get their movement of their foot with their hands together, and it's going to be fine. Now, again, this is something that's going to get better with practice. I know we don't like hearing that, but it is. But I will tell you, I do have a little trick that I use. So especially with waves, we're going to see this week too. When I quilt along a wave and reposition, it's very repetitive, right? That's what I want, a nice repeating wave. But what is happening is I have very clear little stitches very repetitively where that's happened. I don't necessarily like that, because then it becomes more noticeable. If you have it all lined up and you're like, oh, there that is. So what I like to do is kind of vary the position on which I reposition the ruler. So if I'm doing, let's just say, straight lines echoing each other, or wavy lines echoing each other, I'm not always going to transition in the same spot on the ruler because I don't want it to be noticeable. So really the whole thing about quilting isn't, not making mistakes. It's just knowing how to hide them or make them less noticeable. And I really feel like that's the one thing I've been really good at. So if that doesn't make sense, don't even worry about it. We're going to talk about it week 2. We're going to talk about it when we get to the wavy rulers. But just know that, embracing it, call it, I don't know, give it some kind of fancy art name, like variable stitches. I love how some are small and some are huge. It's just great. But again, that will come with practice. And I probably have used this analogy before in our live chats, but it's like worrying about your stitch length is like worrying about your handwriting when you're still learning how to write your letters. So usually in classes, when somebody brings up the question, I tell them that I don't want to talk about it till the end of the class. At the end of the class, if they're still having trouble with it, then we'll address it. Because sometimes if you don't even worry about it, kind of let that subconscious take over, you'll have better results. So try it and let me know what you think. Maybe I'm just, full of it. But so inconsistent stitch size will help. And I don't want to be a downer, but even if you have a stitch regulator, you can still have inconsistent stitch length. If I want to go stop before I went my allotted space, I might get a little one here or there. Again, it doesn't matter. It really doesn't. I figure as long as I can't get my foot stuck in that stitch as I pull it over me, it's going to be great. So that's just me though. I'm not a perfectionist. I'm a people pleaser. It's a completely different neuroses. So there's that. Okay, how about this frustration? You're quilting along, you're doing everything right, and then it keeps hitting the back of your foot or hitting a part of your machine. So this is specific to sewing machines. On long arms, this isn't really anything you should have to run into. If your ruler is hitting a part of your foot or your mechanism, that means it's probably fallen, which I don't even think that's possible. But on a sewing machine, one of the great things about teaching such a fun technique is that everybody's using a different type of machine, a different brand, a different way it works. And the analogy that I have, it's like if I'm teaching somebody how to drive in the US, the wheel is always in the same place no matter what kind of car it is, right? The gas is always in the same place. Not so much with sewing machines. So sometimes how the foot is connected to the shank will be by a screw, and maybe that screw is too big. I've seen that where it technically is a high shank machine, but the head on the screw is so large that it's running into the ruler. Well, in that instance, you can go find another screw. In the past, I've had students around here just take it to like a hardware store and say, I need a smaller head just like this. But it probably is because you have a low shank sewing machine and you're using rulers that are a little too thick. So let's talk about that. The shank is just where the foot connects to the machine, and low shank just means that screw that holds it in is lower than a high shank. And I know they don't all use screws. I know all machines are a little different. I'm just talking generally. So the low shank machines, when you're using something like this that's thicker, it's a 1/4 inch thick acrylic, which is great for high shank machines or long arm, it'll hit that and kind of won't go around it. So if you have that kind of machine, there's a couple things you can do. First, you're going to want to get probably low shank rulers or rulers that are a little thinner. So these are particular ones that have a lower profile. They're around an 1/8 inch thick as opposed to a 1/4. But let's say you already have some rulers and you're like, I already got this ruler and I love it. I've got slim and slim's the best. Well, here's the thing. You don't have to work from all sides of your foot. So again, we'll talk about this when we get into the challenge, but I prefer to work from the front and the left of my foot. So if the screw is in the back, I can just kind of avoid it. But I've seen machines where the screw's on the left. Well, that means we can work from the right side or the front side. So there are some workarounds, whether it's, changing out the screw if possible, or, working from different sides of the foot, or getting low shank rulers. And that really is kind of the exciting news that I have to announce. So I've teamed up with Creative Grids to relaunch 3 of my most popular rulers in low shank form. So these are the same fun rulers, are just thinner profile, an 1/8 inch. And I chose the curvier ones because those are the ones that are tricky to work around a low shank machine. And we will have some more coming out for sure, but I definitely wanted to get these out in time for the challenge, and I appreciate Creative Grids working so hard for me. So these are actually on pre-order. They're not available quite yet. They'll be shipping the middle of October. But it just so happens we won't really get to the curvy stuff till about that time. So you can definitely check those out. If you're familiar with my other rulers, it's the same thing. So Shelly, I have in the regular 1/4 inch thick. This one does clamshells, and what I love about it is it's the same curve no matter which side I'm working from. So for me on my long arm, if I want to do orange peels and I want to work from the top, well before if I want to do it upside down, I'd have to work from the back of the foot. Well, I don't like to do that because it's awkward. So this one I could just put that way and continue on. And same for a sewing machine. If you're more comfortable on the left side of the foot or the front, you're going to be able to kind of stick in that area. Now, I should segue here. This is kind of going off topic. You might be thinking, I don't know what side of the foot I like to work on. Well, just keep quilting. Just quilt, quilt, quilt. And you'll notice after a while, you tend to always be on one side of the foot. Perfect. That's the side you like to be on. So Shelly, and then also Taj. And so I picked Taj because cutout rulers are really fun for any levels, any skill levels when it comes to machine quilting. I really like doing the little leaves and the hearts and the cutesy shapes that are hard to kind of, you can freehand them, but it's a lot more fun to work on the cutout. And then of course, Squiggy. Now there were a couple questions on a Squiggy on the chat, and so I'll answer those in a second. But Squiggy helps you do serpentine lines and also wavy lines. And the inside works for 2-inch borders and the outside for 3-inch. So fun kind of versatile rulers. Again, if you already have some low shank rulers, perfect if you have a low shank machine. But if you don't have a low shank machine, you probably should use regular rulers, especially on a long arm. So don't use these on a long arm because that hopping foot mechanism, this will slip right under there, and you don't want that because your needle will hit your ruler, break your needle. It's just not fun. So don't do that. So really excited about those, and there's links in the description box below. So once the video is done, the chat is over, there'll be like the whole description box. I've already put it in there, links to the rulers if you're interested in that. Also, I've put together a downloadable PDF tip sheet, just real basic about all the frustrations we talked about, and then my suggestions for fixing it so that you don't have to try to write too fast. Although I guess I should have maybe told you that before. So if you're taking notes, perfect. If not, don't worry. There's a link that you can download it. So very, very fun. Okay, so now that's all for that presentation, but I have got pages and pages of questions. So I'm going to go ahead and just kind of address the ones that were asked on the chat, and then see if anyone else comes up. So very, very fun. Okay, so Georgia asked this just a little bit ago, and I answered it, but I thought this is so good. She asked me, do I use more than one ruler in an area of my quilt? Yes. That's what's fun about rulers. You can combine them just like you would quilting designs. And it just so happens we'll be seeing that the last week of the challenge. I'm going to talk about how to use, see if I can get it out. I don't know if you'll be able to see it, but why not? So in this part of here we go. I was combining some wavy lines and then Shelly, and showing how you can kind of use them together to pop things out. Now, little spoiler alert, what's awesome about this is I don't have to try to match up the clamshells. I can quilt a few, and then when it's annoying or I'm having trouble keeping track of them, just switch to a filler. But yes, using more than one ruler is just kind of like using more than one sewing machine or quilting design. You can definitely combine them with each other. It does take a little bit more thinking, but that's what's fun about it. You can master one, master the other, and then put them together and have a whole new challenge. So definitely a great way to get more out of your rulers and more versatile designs for your quilts. Lots of questions about cross hatching on the chat, and I hadn't even thought about it. Here's the problem. Sometimes when you don't like something, you just forget about it, or you just assume everybody else doesn't like it. I don't prefer cross hatching because it's just so tedious and it has to be pretty right. But since there's questions about it, I'll work that up and maybe try to use it in a live chat after the straight line. So there are tricks to making it a little easier. So just stay tuned for that. Sky asked, why does a thread break when she's quilting one way? And I can't remember, I think she said she was moving the quilt backwards. I think this could have something to do with a lot of things, but the generic answer I would give, or the most common reason for that is we tend to be one side dominant. We tend to favor one hand over the other. We tend to favor quilting one direction over the other. And so sometimes if we're moving one way and it's difficult and the other way it's easy, that's just a thing. And so sometimes you'll see thread breaks or skip stitches when you're going in a direction that doesn't feel comfortable. I would be curious to know, does it happen when you're in the free motion foot as well, or is it just on the ruler foot? If it's just on the ruler foot, it's either the foot is too high or too low and it's breaking that thread, or maybe you're just not comfortable moving in that direction. So hopefully that helps. Again, such a vague question, but definitely one of the common frustrations, right? You're quilting along, you've worked yourself up and it keeps breaking. We've all been there. The good news is it's probably one little tiny thing. The bad news is it could be one of hundreds. So we'll just work through that. Deborah asked, what kind of sewing machine will I be demonstrating on? So in all the challenge videos, I show it on a long arm and a sewing machine. The designs always go together the same, but sometimes there's a tip, a tip or a trick or a takeaway that will help you on either one. So on the sewing machine, I'm using the Handy Quilter Stitch 710. And so that's the one I use. But as long as you have a sewing machine, you're good to go. Anne had a great question. I already answered it. Which one should you learn, free motion or ruler? Either one. It really has to do with your personality. Now, I kind of think, don't laugh, I kind of think that I can do a little bit of psychoanalysis or, like a little, just based on your quilting preferences. I don't want to stereotype, but in general, if you're more of a perfectionist person, more detail-oriented, more like, I just want it to be perfect, then ruler quilting is a really great option because it just gives you a template to follow, a guide to work through. If you're more like, whatever, it's good, it's fine, then maybe you might not like going so slow with the ruler. So just try both of them, try either one, it doesn't really matter. All right, Mary Rose said she's having a hard time with curved rulers, keeping the foot on it without pushing the ruler out of the way. Now I wrote this down because I'm hoping that some of the tips I've already given will help you with that, Mary Rose. Again, working within your fingertips, even those long waves, even if I've got a wavy ruler here, even if it's a long wave, I'm still working within my fingertips. That means I need to reposition my hand a lot as I go. And so that will help. And then also not nudging, make sure you're pushing down and then over. So hopefully that helps. This is a good question. Carol said, and this is funny because I don't think I've been asked this one before. Carol said, how do you determine which side of the free motion quilting foot to use? Well, it depends. On a long arm, I always use the left in the front because I'm using my right hand to turn on the machine and turn it off. On a sewing machine, you have way more flexibility. You can work from any side of the foot that you can work from. Now, that sounds silly, right? Any side that you can work from. You're limited only by the mechanism of your machine, by where the screw is or by where the foot goes or what have you. But if it's clear, you can quilt with that side. In general, I always keep, I don't know why, but I always put the ruler in my left hand on the sewing machine, even though I'm right hand dominant. I think that's just from long arming. I could do it the other way, it doesn't matter, but it's just what works. What I would suggest is as you're working through the challenge and as you're quilting, try a lot of different hand positions, try a lot of different, ruler orientations, because I think the more you try, the more you'll know if you like it or not. I mean, it's kind of like, how do you know if you like Brussels sprouts, right? You try it. You'll know pretty quick if you like it or not. Although in my classes, I kind of joke, try all different sides and whichever one makes you feel less like throwing up, that's the one you should go with. But ultimately, definitely try those different ones out because you might find one that works for you. Now, next week in our live chat, we're going to talk about kind of like the basics of ruler quilting, and I'm going to talk a lot about hand position, but also that's another thing you should switch up a lot too, your hand position. You might find one way works better than the other for you. So Molly on Facebook said, what was the favorite tip or trick that helped me kind of take my ruler quilting to the next level? And I kind of had to think about that. I'm like, I don't know. I think it was quilting in between my fingertips. Definitely, I was really bad in the beginning about quilting along the whole thing. So let me just show you this poor little guy right here. This is my wavy ruler. I've got my grip on the back, right? I covered up with tape when I'm not using it so it doesn't scratch up my other rulers. Look at a little divot right there. Can you see that? We know how that happened, right? My hand was down here and my machine was up there. So once I kind of got in my head, okay, I need to move my hand or move the ruler. I need to move it. Even if it takes longer, the result's going to be much better. Okay, so Terry just asked a question that I had listed because that is one that came up too. Which ruler would I suggest for a beginner? Which ruler should you get? Sometimes people will come into our quilt shop that we have here in Liberty and they'll say, which ruler should I get? And it's like, it's such a big question. So I'm going to try to help distill it down and tell you my advice, but just know it might be different for you. The first ruler I think everybody should start with is a good straight edge ruler, because straight edge is a versatile one. You can use it for stitching in the ditch. You can use it for geometric designs. It's a nice way to get started with ruler quilting. I like slim because it's just kind of hand-sized, but I did mention that I have a longer straight edge that I use sometimes as well. If you're working on a smaller throated sewing machine, aim for a smaller, shorter ruler. That way you're not always running it into the edge there. So slim is, about 6 or 7 inches. You could go larger or smaller. It doesn't have to be a ruler though that only does straight edge. So let's say you're thinking, I don't even know if I like ruler quilting. I don't have any friends I can go steal their rulers. I always tell my classes, I'm like, go borrow your friends' rulers and see if you like them. If you don't have any of that, maybe opt for one that has a straight edge and then just a little something else, right? So something's gonna be a little bit more versatile for you. When we get into curves, we'll talk about that. Again, that's a little bit more to think about, but it's not difficult. So look for something that has a straight edge. Even like this could work, a straight edge and then a little curve, or just a good straight edge, that's fine too. Okay, beyond that, beyond the straight edge, whatever you want. And that's in classes or in the shop when people are like, I don't know what I want. So not every ruler is for every person. So you really had to drive that home for some of my students. If you look at a ruler and you think, why on earth would anybody use that? That means that ruler isn't for you, right? So think about to yourself, kind of take stock, what do you like to quilt and what do you have trouble quilting, right? So let's say serpentine lines. I love Squiggy. I use Squiggy as a wavy line. I don't really use him for serpentine lines because I feel comfortable freehanding those. However, if you were thinking, man, I want to quilt serpentine lines, I can't quilt them, that's the kind of ruler I'd go with, right? So what I have trouble quilting is something like Taj. That symmetrical shape is tricky because if it's not symmetrical, it's gonna look obvious it's not symmetrical. So that would be an instance where I would use Taj, or maybe a circle. Has anybody tried quilting a circle? It's not super easy. So asking myself, what is it that I like to quilt and what's a couple rulers I can get? Okay, so you're still thinking, all right, whatever, that doesn't help me. So go for a straight edge ruler, get a wavy ruler, just something with a repeating wave. It could be, anything that you can kind of create some all over waves, which we'll see. Wavy ruler is really nice, especially this one's double-sided, so I get 2 different waves. Get a wavy ruler, and then maybe something, just another extra one, like Taj or, Sid, or something with a cutout. Once you kind of work with that, then you'll kind of see all the different rulers there are and all the different things you can work with. But you kind of have to have an idea before you start, do I even like this? So I apologize, I'm talking like 20 minutes about one question, but I know I knew it was a question that I'd have to answer a lot during the challenge, and it's just one of those that's hard to write it out, like just whatever rulers you have. Hopefully that gives you a little bit of guidance. Just start with a few, 3 or 4, start with a range of ones, and then once you work with it, you'll know what you love and what you don't love. Clamshells are another one that I don't like to quilt without a ruler because, that's very consistent. Now, I will say smaller clamshells, no problem. I like my smaller clamshells a little more organic and different sized, so I don't use a ruler for that, but the bigger ones definitely. So hopefully that helps give you some ideas for that. All right, one more question that came through earlier, and then I'll kind of scan through and answer any of those. Selwyn asked, or talked about stitching in the ditch, and she was specifically on a long arm. So stitching in the ditch is one of those things that I love to do, and it's so weird because that is not my personality. That would be like me saying I love to mop the floor. We know that's not true, but I do like stitching in the ditch because it makes me a more efficient quilter. If I can use the stitching in the ditch to get to the next place or stabilize the quilt, I love to do that. But the thing is, sometimes when we're stitching in the ditch, we think we're quilting a straight line. We're not. You're not quilting a straight line. You're quilting along the seam. And if you piece like I do, it's not straight. It's a little more wavy, a little more organic. So when I'm working on a quilt and I'm stitching in the ditch, I'm going in short increments. So I'm still using my straight edge, right? I'm still lining it up, keeping it, but I'm adjusting every couple of inches if it needs it. And that just helps keep it to the seam. That's the number one thing that I think really helped me back in the day when I'd quilt for customers. You don't want to quilt a straight line if their seam isn't straight. That just shows how bad the seam is. So keeping it along that seam. Second of all, if it's been pressed, kind of hanging out to the low side is nice, if at all possible. And that kind of helps it kind of suck into there. But stitching in the ditch is kind of like, I don't know, I guess being like a major league pitcher. You have your good days and you have your bad days. If your days you're like, I'm on fire, I'm gonna stitch all these seams. Other days I'm like, yep, I'm gonna do some swirls. Just knowing that sometimes it's there, sometimes it's not. The good news is though, best news of all, it doesn't matter how close you are or how, like if you come out a little bit and don't rip them out, because once you get done, you take the quilt off the frame or you take it out and you kind of fluff it out, it sucks in, right? And so the fabric kind of grows over it and so helps hide it too. So you don't have to worry so much about every little bobble showing. I will say, if you don't, like if that's like, oh, I don't like that, I've been known to, instead of stitching in the ditch, just do a little serpentine line back and forth, right? So if I'm gonna make the mistake, I'll just embrace it and make it look intentional. So you could just skip the stitching in the ditch altogether if you wanted. All right, so let's see some questions. Oh, a question that came up last time was talking about my new space, so new shelves. I have an event space, and this is my filming studio, so very fun. This is where all the challenges will be filmed. Really nice to be able to film it all in one place and not have to, yell at my kids to stop being loud when I'm trying to film at home. So very, very nice if you're wondering about that. Susan, organic, yes, that's why your seams are never straight. You're organic. Yeah, it's fabric, it shifts. I'll just see if there's any questions. Kind of scanning through. I love how everybody is kind of chatting with each other and kind of, helping each other out. I really like that. The first one came on, Rochelle says, is the handy quilter stitch what I usually use for free motion quilting? Yes, on a sewing machine. That's my quilting, what I do my machine quilting and piecing on. I don't have a bunch of different machines. That's just that one. So very fun. Okay, so let's talk about next week's challenge. Hopefully I've answered most of your questions. I feel like I have talked a lot, hopefully not too fast. It's my bad habit, it's talking too fast. If I didn't address a question that you have, after the video is over, after the chat is done, you'll be able to leave it in the comment section below. So you can definitely do that. And I'll kind of circle back around to kind of keep track and maybe address it in the next live chat. Like I said last week, I'm going to be doing this every Thursday through the end of the challenge. Mostly because, well, all my trips have been canceled, thanks COVID. And then also, what we're learning isn't complex, but there's a lot of nuances, and I want to make sure that I'm addressing all of those. Next week, same time, Thursday at 3 p.m. Central. By the way, saw somebody's watching in the middle of the night in Japan. Thank you for that. I don't know if I love anybody enough to interrupt my sleep, but I appreciate that. Next one, we'll be talking about the basics of ruler quilting on your sewing machine and your long arm, and it'll just be a quick kind of overview, just giving some practical tips and helping out with that. Now, in the meantime, you can download the tip sheet that will talk about everything I talked about today. You can definitely check out those rulers if you want. And if you've ordered product for the Free Motion Challenge, now, of course, like always, it's free. The videos don't cost anything, but if you have purchased the panel or the thread, we are filling orders. They are going out, so just give us a little bit of a patience and we'll get this out as quickly as possible. Anyway, thank you so much for joining me for another afternoon. I appreciate it. I love that I get to talk about what I love and that people want to listen. So if you have any questions about anything I talked about, you can always check out the description box below and it will have the information there. I will see you next week, and until then, happy quilting.